Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
You know, to be honest, the actual physical act of sex is pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, it can also be extremely complicated. This is because it isn't simply a matter of inserting tab A into slot B. Sex isn't just a physical act. For most of us, it's also an emotional one. And it's here where most of the trouble comes in. In healthy, happy marriages, what goes on in the bedroom is about 10% of the focus of the relationship. But in troubled marriages, that can jump to as high as 90% of what people are focusing on. And this actually leads to some really troubling statistics. 15 to 20% of marriages today are considered sexless, and that means that they have sex less than 10 times per year. And you might think that this is only happening with couples who've been married a long time and have gotten bored with each other, but it's also happening in relatively new marriages, people who've been married less than 5 years. So to get to the heart of why this is happening, and more importantly, what can be done about it and how you can avoid it in your relationship, I'm joined by counselor and relationship coach Lisa Merlo-Booth. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this really important topic.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Leslie.
Because I know and you know that there are three reasons why people come to get help. Money, communication, and sex.
And sex, right.
And it's always a biggie. And you have a blog called Straight Talk for Women blog, and you've written about how to squash sex and intimacy in your marriage, which implies that there's actions people are doing that are making this happen. So what is actually driving the increasing number of sexless marriages that we're seeing today?
So I would say there are kind of two groups to that. So one, there's the subtle things of everyday life, and the second are kind of brash things such as character and how people are showing up. So the subtle things include just life, right? People, they get caught up. They're overwhelmed. They're busy. They're working too long. They're distracted. They're exhausted with the kids. You know, they're mind-numbing through technology. And they're doing all of these things without keeping their finger on the pulse, so to speak. So they just kind of lose sight of their marriage. It's not a purposeful thing. It's just, like I said, they don't have their finger on the pulse, and they're not paying attention to it. So,
well, yeah, and it's so hard now. I mean, that's one of the things that I hear all the time when I'm talking about how to reconnect with your partner. And you know, the number one thing is start spending time together. And then but there's no time. And, of course, that's not entirely true. There is time, but like you said, with just the regular day-to-day little rats on the treadmill that we are, we do lose sight of that.
Right, and we forget to make our relationship a priority. If your relationship is a priority and you have that at the forefront of your mind, you'll find the time. But instead, we're like, no, I just need to chill right now, or no, I got to run this, I got to do that, I got to do the laundry. And so we let 1,000 other things take precedence over our relationship, and then like we wake up and we're like, like what happened? I feel so distant, and yeah, a sexless marriage is certainly one of the symptoms of that because you're just not prioritizing.
Well, and it's really interesting because I don't know what my husband was reading. He was reading something on the internet, an article, and it was talking about, you know, that nighttime sex is really not great. And whoever did this article said optimum time for sex is Sunday morning at 9 o'clock.
And they obviously don't have young children when they said that.
But it's really funny because you talk about that 9 o'clock. When I moved into the house I live in now, there's a church not terribly far away that has their phony church bells and music, and I hated it when I first moved here. But the bells go off at 9 o'clock, noon, and 6 p.m. So before my kids could tell time, it was like, you can't get out of bed until you hear the church bells ring.
Oh, my gosh. That's great.
So we had this great time. It's like, okay, how much time do we have?
Right.
But yeah, it is. It's really tough, and that is one of the big things that I think gets couples off track is when they have children, because it is really hard. You've got a baby crying, or you've got somebody standing outside your door. Yeah, that's really romantic. It's like, okay, hurry up and finish, because the kids are like, Mom. It's like,
exactly,
and that's not going to happen.
Right, and couples are really like they don't want to schedule it. They want it to be spontaneous and wild and passionate, like it may have been prior to kids. But when life happens and you have kids, like sometimes you just have to schedule, like you said, 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Great, Well, and then the spontaneity can be, what do you do? I mean, you don't always have to do the same thing. The spontaneity can be all of that, Right. Exactly.
So we're just setting aside time, and then whatever happens in that time is great. But you talk about the second thing, which I think is, I don't know how common it is, but it certainly is much more damaging. And that's what you're talking about in terms of the character issues more than just, because I think with couples, if we can get them to see, okay, just start spending a little bit more time together, I think they get that, and that's something that's easy to implement. But what's going on with what you're talking about character issues?
Yeah, and I actually see this a lot. I see this is common in my practice. Now, I tend to get tough couples, but so character issue is, for example, the bully. So, I get women in my office, and the men they really have a temper, and they get intimidating, and they can rage, and it's their, everybody's like walking on eggshells around the home. Don't set dad off, right? Well, that'll burn out intimacy. It's really hard to be intimate with somebody who you're afraid of day to day.
Right. Absolutely.
So, that's not going to endear
like,
you.
Oh, yeah, him. Please. You've just called me horrible names. Now I want to go climb into bed with you.
Right. Exactly.
But the amazing part is that the people, because it's not always the men, it can be women too, but for the most part it's the men. It's like, and they don't make the connection. It's like,
no, exactly.
You just were really mean and nasty to me, and now you want to have sex.
Right, and this is what's so crazy-making in our culture, and I believe, like, in our culture, our culture runs on a power-over paradigm, which we confuse power with aggression all the time. So you're right, women absolutely can bully, and by and large, men tend to be the bulliers more often, right? And so men just think, like, what's the big deal? Yeah, you made me mad, and damn right I'm going to yell, or damn right I'm going to be intimidating, and that has nothing to do with sex. And then when the women say no, they're not feeling close to them, the men get more angry.
Right.
And it's like, you cannot shoot yourself in the foot any harder.
Yeah, you kind of like, okay, how's this working for you? Because, and then I would also think that even if a partner does say yes out of fear, which is not a great aphrodisiac, then the sex can't be great.
Exactly. Well, and so this goes along. So the bullying is one. Another one is the demanding partner who just, and this. So I'll say a couple that tend to be more male and a couple that tend to be more on the female spectrum, understanding that both can crisscross, right?
Correct.
But, typically the demander is also a male, and he kind of feels entitled to sex. You married me, you owe me sex. I've actually had men who have made it a point to have it in their prenuptial agreement that they were going to have sex so many times a week, right? And so what happens is they want sex when they want it, how they want it, and as often as they want it. And if the women say no, the men get really angry about it. They get annoyed. They put out a stink. They
pout.
They pout. And so I had this one couple, it was really interesting. They had an agreement that she wouldn't say no, that if she didn't want to be sexual, what she would do is she would agree to a quickie. And I said, well, wait a second. What do you mean? Like, what if you just really didn't want to? She's like, you know what? It's no big deal. It's easier than saying no to him because he just gets mad. And I was like, wait a second. If you can't say no, then your yes is not a yes. That'll be the quickest way to kill out any sexual desire I can imagine. And so, like, the men need to realize you're not entitled, and pressuring it is not going to get you it any more than you demanding it. It's not going to work. It's
one of those things that it may work in the short run, but but then it's the damage that's being done.
Yes. Yes.
And and unfortunately, there is a segment of society, and my living in the South, I tend to see this a little bit more frequently, because it's my right as the husband.
Yes.
Wives must submit, and
I cannot think of a more non-relational approach. I just, when I hear that, I cringe. And I think that is not serving the men any more than it is the women, because what I see is the women, even if they continue to have sex with them, the women are seething. And they make these men pay, they just don't do it directly.
Exactly. Yeah, then we get other kinds of stuff going on, which isn't very helpful for the relationship. So what are some other character issues?
Let's talk about more of a female, right? So she might be the denier, and the denier is I have a low sex drive. I'm not really too into sex that much. I don't ever initiate. I'm often saying no. I'm making up excuses, and
there's always a reason why it's not possible.
Right. There's always a reason, and it's never quite the best time. So their husbands are, they're trying to be kind. They're trying to treat them well. They're trying to, but it doesn't matter. Any which way they try to approach it, the women, there's always some reason why that's just not going to happen. And so that's really hard, because at some point the men stop trying. And the tricky thing is here, the men stop trying and the women are like, whew, thank God.
Exactly. Whoa, okay.
Right.
We don't. He doesn't want it anymore.
Exactly.
No, that's not true. He does want it. It's just...
And that's when the women, rather than breathing a sigh of relief, they should be worried.
Well, but isn't there, and here's the thing about, and I guess it's not an excuse, but it is maybe more of an explanation, that some women, and I count myself in that group, don't necessarily feel desire until they're actually physically aroused. So it's kind of like, okay, so it doesn't necessarily, if my husband was waiting for me to initiate until I felt desire, he'd be waiting a hell of a long time.
Right, right.
But I'm also aware of that, and so I can initiate. One can initiate even if one isn't necessarily feeling desire. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding for both men and women that women aren't necessarily wired the same as men in terms of desire.
Exactly. Well, and sometimes it's the men who have a low sex drive, right? In any couple, you might have one person who's got a higher desire and the other one has a lower, but you got to have conversations around that. You have to discuss that. And if one says, look, I'm not an initiator, but I'm all for it. Like, if I can get into it, I will absolutely go for it, And so
well, that's...
if you have that understanding. But the deniers, no, they're like, it's not...
They don't want it, and they're not going to do anything to get it. They're the flip side of the bully, or the one who feels entitled that your feelings don't matter, which of course is disastrous for relationships.
Right, you can't, and then that won't work. So that's one of the women. Another one is the complainer. This can be either way. It also probably falls more on the women, which is like, nothing's good enough. They're always tweaking, including the sex. And this is tricky because it is really important to, there are some people who are just, they're not good lovers, right?
Right.
And some men who are very selfish, they just want to do it, and they don't care about their partners, how they're feeling. And some women who just want to, be the receiver and don't want to, whatever.
Right.
And so, so you do need to ask for what you need and want around sex, but not you are not critiquing. It can't be like, I hate when you touch me there, and you need to kiss me here, and then, gosh, you know what, the way you breathe really bothers me. So
right.
There has
and most
to
of
be
the time this is happening in the moment. And it's like, people always say, when do you have conversations about what you'd like sexually or whatever? I said, not in the bedroom, unless either one, something is feeling really good, or number two, something is hurting.
Right, exactly.
Otherwise, don't do that.
Right, exactly. Because nobody, that's a quick way for somebody to struggle with sexual performance, because they feel like they're graded all the time, that it becomes an anxiety, not a joy.
Right, which defeats the entire, or one of the purposes of sex.
Exactly. And this complainer can go, it's not just in the bedroom. Like, they might be just a micromanager in general. Everything's off, and so the person never feels like they're good enough anywhere. It's just a constant, it's got that negative lens. That can certainly kill out. Right,
which again eats away at the foundation of the relationship.
Yes.
This is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm having a really important conversation about sex and intimacy with relationship expert Lisa Merlo-Booth. And if you're struggling with this in your marriage, I encourage you not to wait another minute to address it. I invite you to send me an email or give me a phone call and take advantage of my free, no-obligation strategy session on how to bring better sex and intimacy into your marriage. You can reach me at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. Or you can shoot me an email at Leslie, L-E-S-L-I, no E, L-E-S-L-I, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And so if you recognize you or your husband or your whoever in any of these descriptions, I encourage you to really take this seriously. So, Lisa, you talk about other kinds of behaviors that can create intimacy issues in a relationship. What are some of those?
So one, if you are working all the time, if you're a workaholic, you're never home, right? And then, sometimes what I'll hear, again, this tends to be often more men tend to be workers. They're more performance-based, right? Although women are quickly catching up, I have to say.
Somehow I think we need to take another look at that, but that's a whole other topic for another day.
Yeah. But I get a lot of couples in here, and the women are like, he's never home. I'm lonely. I'm sad. And he'll be like, I'm providing for this family, and you don't appreciate me. And then it's like, you're not listening to her. You're providing for the home, but you're not actually being a participant in the home.
Right, and you're not providing for some of the other things that term means.
Right. Emotional support, like, even support in the house, like we should be partnering together. And this idea that your sole role is to be the breadwinner, even if the woman's not working, she can't be working 24/7 and he comes home and she's still working, but his job's done and he comes in really late.
Right.
She's going to feel lonely. And what happens is then she starts complaining to him. He gets upset. Then he stays later because he doesn't want to come home because she's complaining
because the environment isn't pleasant.
It's not pleasant.
And the pattern continues.
And the pattern continues. And then what happens is he succeeded. Now he has really distanced himself, and she's no longer interested in sex. I'm not interested anymore. I'm working like a dog all the time. You don't listen to me. You don't think me. I have no voice here with you, and I don't want to be intimate. So that's another piece, another thing that can happen. And then another one is lack of emotional intimacy.
Which people really miss that one, I think.
Yeah. it's like, and this is hard because men tend to connect through sex. That does bring intimacy for them. I also think it's connecting for women as well. However, women like the emotional intimacy before they're going to be sexual.
Right.
And
I call it the cosmic joke. It's like, who designed this system? You know, but in reality, I tell people, you know, if you both, you know, if men will work on being a little bit more emotionally intimate before they initiate sex, and women will be a little bit more open physically, everybody wins. It's like you have to take a little leap of faith.
Exactly. Because it's hard if you can't have any honest conversations or kind of supportive conversations, and then you're going to jump into bed. It's like lukewarm at best, and certainly lukewarm for women at best.
Right.
And they don't want to share. They don't want to share all of themselves if they can't even share emotionally with them, you know, themselves. Just doesn't work. Yeah, and it is a real big disconnect. So what else? What other kind of behaviors? So with women can I call it like the cold fish. She can turn into a cold fish where she's so concerned that if she hugs him, it's going to turn into sex, or he's going to get the wrong idea. So now there's zero. She won't hold his hand. If he goes to kiss her, she's going to give her his cheek. It's like she is ultra aware of giving zero sexual signs, and so their relationship becomes just so cold and roommate-like that there's nothing to play off of. There's nothing to warm it up on. Well, and I do think that there's kind of a flip side to that. And this goes into the non-sexual touching, that you need to be touching your partner at times in a non-sexual way, because if somebody is only touched as a as the way into sex, then not that I think it's healthy, but I can certainly understand why somebody would pull back. Because if the only time you touch me is because sex is on the table, then and I think this goes to for those people who have an emotional need for affection, just holding my hand or giving me a hug or patting my shoulder as you walk by, or while we're sitting in the car holding hands. I mean, these things that are non-sexual, I think, can also play into that. And and that goes both ways. It's so important. Like, if it's the woman who's worried that he's going to get sexual, then she's got to have a conversation with him, and she's got to hold his hand, like you said, do nice affectionate touching, sit on the couch next to him, put your hand on his leg, give him a hug, that kind of thing. If she's worried that the man is, or there's been a pattern where the man, anytime she did any of that, he immediately started going straight to sex no matter what she said, he's got to back off and stop. And I think that that there's something or vice versa, whatever the sex is, but go ahead. Yeah, I think that there's something that also, that just because a man gets physically aroused doesn't necessarily mean he wants sex. Yes. Because sometimes it's just a physiological response. Now, I'm not going to say he wouldn't necessarily want sex, but just because he's physically aroused doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go there. Right. Absolutely. So are there any other behaviors that can create, well, I'm sure there's a bazillion behaviors that can create problems. There's so many. And two that I'll just name quickly, being a selfish lover. I mean, I mentioned that in a minute. That's going to do it. Lack of appreciation, in particular for men, but this could go both ways. But men like to hear, thanks. I appreciate you. You're doing. And so I often hear from men, I feel like I can't do anything right. And so, for women to pay attention and to acknowledge and note and be thankful, and, it can't just be that our home men or women, is just a place where we make up lists and we get things done, and we have to remember on both sides, male and female, to be cherishing and loving to our partners. And
what a concept.
Right. I mean, it seems like we treat strangers on the street. Let me spit that out. Better than we do our loved ones, and that's backwards.
I say that all the time, and we sometimes worry more about what the grocery clerk thinks about us than we do our own partner. And I'm like, okay, that's just flipped on its head.
Yes.
And I think a lot of this has to do with some of those patterns that, and it's why I always I don't know how you feel about this when you hear it, but it just makes me want to run into the street screaming about, that the way to have a happy, successful relationship is for the man to just say, yes, dear. It's like,
no.
Because that just, and it just assumes that the woman always knows what's right in the relationship, which when you know that women are the ones who initiate about 90% of the divorces, you kind of wonder, okay, do they really know how to make a relationship work?
Right. Well, and I mean, that's going to be a quick road to resentment as well. You can't just keep saying yes, 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 and ignoring your own needs and wants. That's true for men or women on either side. It just doesn't work.
So,
one other thing I just wanted to note on this is affairs.
Mm-hmm.
Our world minimizes the impact of affairs all the time, and if you had an affair, I'm telling you, you have to earn trust, and she or he, and I don't care if the man cheated or the woman cheated, I see it on both sides.
Yep.
It's very hard for them to be sexual, and you have a lot of trust that you have to earn. You cannot just move on. Can we let it go? I came back to you.
Right.
That thinking drives me crazy.
Well, and what people have to understand is couples can survive affairs, but there's I don't know if you want to call it a system. There are things that have to happen, and rebuilding trust is one of them. And it can't be, that happened 6 months ago. Why are you still
right?
Why are you still upset about it?
Exactly.
But if somebody recognizes themselves or their partners in these characteristics or behaviors, what can they do?
The first thing you have to do is you have to have a conversation. And I don't care who your partner is, even if your partner is the bully, right? You have to find the courage to say, hey, this is not working for me. And you have to start setting limits and saying, listen, you keep pushing me to have sex, but I'm walking on eggshells around you all day, and I just want you to know that's going to be off the table for me until you work your anger, right? If you have somebody who has a low sex drive and is always saying, no, you have to have the conversation and say, listen, I love you, and I want us to stay married forever. I really do. And I also know I am not willing to be in a sexless marriage for the rest of my life. So we have to get help for this. I'm not willing to just kind of say, okay.
And what people have to understand is that's not an ultimatum.
No.
It's actually a promise. It's trying to find, and I know you'll know what I'm talking about when I say this, it's trying to find where you have leverage in the relationship. If the relationship is important, then we have to be willing to take action to make it better.
Yeah.
And because it's not enough to just kind of muddle through. One of my catchphrases is, I don't use miserable and marriage in the same sentence. But it's really hard because people can get into these patterns and not realize the long-term damage that they're doing.
Right. And, when you say, it's not an ultimatum, it's funny. I don't have a problem with ultimatums. And what I mean by that is, if I'm asking you every which way but Sunday, we need to fix this, let's go get help, let's do this, and you block me every which way, right? I'm going to be clear to say, listen, if this is a deal breaker for me, right? If it's a non-negotiable, I am absolutely going to be clear. Listen, if you continue to block me, then I'm really sorry. I love you. and I'm going to have to leave this relationship.
And I'm going to have to leave. Right.
And you can call that an ultimatum, and I would call that a loving act. Because now
I would too.
Right.
I would too. Yeah, because it's a loving act to me. It's like I can no longer sacrifice, because I don't believe that sacrifice is necessary for healthy marriage. In fact, I think it's damaging in and of itself.
Right.
But again, conversation for another day.
Mm-hmm.
But I can no longer continue to sacrifice myself.
And, yeah, absolutely. It's also a loving act to you. Mm-hmm. Because I have this saying that women leave marriages 3 years before they ever walk out.
Absolutely.
And so if I have the courage to tell you that if we don't do this, this, and this, I'm going to leave, that's my gift to you, because now you know what you're looking at. Now you know
right.
How serious is this.
Yeah, because the danger is women try a lot of things, frequently not as direct as that, because I think men get direct.
Yes.
And then they go underground, they're planning, and then when they come up and say, okay, I'm done, the guys are like deer in the headlights, like, what's been going on?
Right.
So I definitely agree. And I would love to continue the conversation because this is really important, but I don't want to lose my listeners. Mm-hmm. So, Lisa, where can people find out more about intimacy, how to have a healthy marriage, all the stuff that you have done throughout the years?
Great. You can check out my website, www.lisamerlobooth.com.
Terrific. So, as you probably heard, intimacy is much, much more than just the physical act of sex. You can have sex without intimacy, and you can be intimate without being sexual. But the most complete relationships have both. So if real intimacy is missing in your marriage, it's important to figure out why and then take action. The sooner you do it, the happier you will be. So until next week, stay loving.